The moment I turned onto Maple Street, an unsettling quiet draped the familiar November twilight. Mrs. Henderson's tabby, usually a territorial fixture on my porch, was conspicuously absent. No string of family cars lined the driveway for our annual Thanksgiving gathering, and the porch light, always aglow for arrivals, remained stubbornly dark. Exhaustion, a lingering fog from Sister Catherine's silent retreat, had dulled my instincts, but not entirely. I'd made it clear to Robert, home by 4 p.m, plenty of time for dinner at 6. He'd promised an empty house, everyone arriving together from the airport. Perfect timing, I'd thought. Now, pulling in at 3:55 p.m. punctuality, even at 72, remained a steadfast virtue. The stillness of the neighborhood, the faint wisp of chimney smoke against leaf-strewn lawns, felt less comforting and more hollow. This colonial house, my home for 43 years, where I'd raised Robert and given piano lessons for decades, suddenly felt vast and silent. Robert and Bethy's persistent suggestions to downsize echoed in the sudden quiet, as if celebrating another birthday rendered me incapable of a 4-bedroom home. I retrieved my small overnight bag, the cool metal of the handle a stark contrast to the warmth I expected within, and walked the flagstone path, my mind ticking through the evening's choreography. Turkey prepped, cranberry sauce made, pies waiting in the freezer. All that remained was my precise execution, a performance honed over decades. My key slid into the lock, the familiar resistance, then the satisfying click. Home. "Hello?" I called out automatically, stepping into the dark foyer, its silence amplifying my own whisper. A faint light bled from the living room, a soft, unnatural glow. I frowned. I always turned everything off before leaving. As my hand reached for the wall switch, a gravelly voice sliced through the dimness. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The air thickened, a sudden chill raising gooseflesh. My heart jolted, a rapid-fire staccato that would have impressed even my most advanced piano students. Barely visible in the muted glow of a single table lamp, a man sat in my favourite rocking chair. A spindly figure with a shock of white hair and gnarled hands folded neatly over a tartan blanket. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice steadier than the tremor in my hands. "And what are you doing in my house?" One roomy blue eye opened, regarding me with surprising sharpness. Arthur Caldwell, Bethy's stepfather. Well, her mother's husband. Stepfather implies I had some hand in raising her, which I most certainly did not. The eye closed again. "As for what I'm doing here, I was rather hoping you might illuminate that particular mystery." I stood frozen, the name Arthur Caldwell a faint echo in my mind. Bethany had mentioned him, her mother's second husband, a retired professor. They'd met him at her mother's funeral. A difficult man, she'd called him, set in his ways. Rather like looking in a mirror, I thought fleetingly, a new unease stirring. "Where is my family?" I asked, finally stepping fully into the living room, the scent of unseen chrysanthemums cloying in the air. "Where are Robert and Bethany? The children?" Arthur Caldwell sighed, a sound of infinite patience stretched thin. "On the table beside you. The note explains everything, or nothing, depending on your perspective." My gaze fell on a folded piece of paper propped against a vase of fresh chrysanthemums flowers. I certainly hadn't left there. With growing apprehension, I reached for it, instantly recognizing Robert's rushed hand. "Mom, sorry for the last-minute change of plans. Bethany won a cruise package through her office. 4 days, all expenses paid. Departing today. Too good an opportunity to pass up, but they only had 4 spots. Arthur needed somewhere to stay since his retirement community is being fumigated this week. Bedbugs. Don't ask. 2 problems. 1 solution. You two will get along great, both stubborn as mules and full of stories. We'll be back Monday night for a belated Thanksgiving dinner. Love you, Robert. P.S. Arthur takes heart medication with dinner. Reminder on the fridge. Thanks, Mom. You're the best." I read it twice, then a third time, the words twisting in my gut. They had left. All of them. On Thanksgiving. Without warning. And they had left me with a complete stranger who, apparently, required medication and supervision. "This can't be right," I whispered, unsure if it was meant for myself or the man observing me. "There must be some mistake." "The only mistake," Arthur replied, both eyes now open, sharp and knowing, "was in their assumption that we would meekly accept this arrangement without complaint." Something in his tone, a blend of irritation and sardonic conspiracy, made me look at him anew. He was older than I'd first thought, perhaps mid-80s, his face a weathered map of lines and uncharted history. Yet, his blue eyes sparked with an intelligence that belied his apparent frailty. "Did you know about this plan?" I asked. A thin smile touched his lips. "Not until they deposited me here this morning with a suitcase and an apology so insincere it wouldn't convince a kindergartner." He shifted in the rocking chair, a small grunt escaping him. "Apparently my presence would ruin the cruise experience for Bethany. Something about my tendency to speak unvarnished truth at inappropriate moments." Despite myself, a reluctant smile tugged at my lips. And what unvarnished truth might that be? That Bethy's new haircut makes her look like she's auditioning for a community theatre production of Annie Get Your Gun, perhaps, he offered. Or that those children of hers spend so much time staring at electronic devices they'll likely evolve without the need for neck mobility. A startled laugh escaped me before I could suppress it. This interloper, this uninvited guest, was not what I'd expected. He was a caustic mirror reflecting my own unspoken judgments. "So," Arthur said, leaning forward slightly, his eyes glinting, "they've abandoned us both for sun and cruise ship buffers. The question is, Margaret Walsh, what do you intend to do about it?" I stared at him, surprised he knew my name, though I shouldn't have been. "How do you know who I am?" He raised one bushy eyebrow. "Besides the obvious context clues," he gestured vaguely around the room, "your photographs are everywhere. And Bethany spent the car ride here explaining that you're particular and set in your ways, but that I shouldn't take it personally. Apparently we're both difficult elderly relatives to be managed rather than people to be respected." The accuracy of his assessment stung. A raw, unexpected ache. Was that truly how my family saw me? A problem to be managed? Arthur's gaze softened fractionally. "I've upset you. Not my intention, though honesty is a habit I've found too rewarding to break at this late stage." I straightened, professional dignity reasserting itself after decades of managing unruly piano students. "You haven't upset me, Mr. Caldwell. You've merely confirmed suspicions I've harbored for some time." He nodded, a gesture of unexpected solidarity. "Then perhaps we understand each other better than our children anticipated." He leaned forward, those startling blue eyes suddenly animated with mischief. "Podemos começar?" "I beg your pardon?" "It's Portuguese. Shall we begin?" "I spent a sabbatical year in Lisbon in my younger days." He waved a dismissive hand. "The question stands, regardless of language. They've played us for fools, Margaret. Shall we begin our response?" I should have been outraged, should have called Robert, should have made arrangements to remove this stranger. Instead, I found myself nodding slowly, a lifetime of restraint and accommodation giving way to something more primal and satisfying. "Yes," I said simply. "I believe we shall." The full absurdity of my situation didn't quite hit until I stood in the kitchen, mechanically preparing tea while an elderly stranger dozed in my living room. My carefully orchestrated Thanksgiving, the turkey that should be roasting, the china that should be arranged, the family that should be arriving, all reduced to a hastily scrawled note and an unexpected houseguest. "Milk, no sugar," Arthur's voice boomed, startling me. He stood in the doorway, steadying himself with a polished wooden cane I hadn't noticed before. "If you're making Earl Grey, that is. Otherwise, plain is fine." "How did you know I was making tea?" He smiled faintly. The kettle whistling was my first clue. The fact that you're British and it's precisely 4 cars provided additional evidence. I'm not British. I was born in Boston. But raised by British parents, unless I miss my guess. That posture didn't come from American public schools, and there's a hint of Sussex in your vowels when you're annoyed. He moved with practiced care to the kitchen table, lowering himself into a chair, which you currently are, though I can't determine if it's with me or the situation. Both, I admitted, pouring hot water into my grandmother's teapot. The familiar ritual, at least, offered a steadying anchor. Your left eyebrow lifts approximately 3 millimeters and you press your lips together, creating a small line just above your chin. Arthur tapped his own chin, demonstrating. 4 decades directing community theatre productions makes one observant of micro-expressions. Theatre, I corrected, a reflex. You said theatre with an ear ending. If you spent time in England, then... so I was right about the British connection. His eyes twinkled, a flicker of satisfaction. One adapts to local pronunciation after 50 years in American academia, but you're correct. It should be theatre. Old habits are easily buried, but never truly die. I brought the tea tray to the table, an irrational gratitude warming me. At least we wouldn't starve. I'd restocked my pantry before the retreat. Yet, the feast I'd planned. Robert's favourite cornbread stuffing, Bethy's marshmallow-topped sweet potatoes, the twins' anticipated demands for extra cranberry sauce, all that careful calibration of family preferences honed over years of holiday meals now felt like a ghost. You're catastrophizing, Arthur observed mildly, accepting a teacup. The expression, I recognized it. My late wife wore it whenever our plans derailed. I am not catastrophizing, I replied, stiff. I am justifiably upset that my family has abandoned me on a major holiday with a complete stranger while they gallivant on a cruise ship. A stranger who requires medication, no less, he added helpfully. Don't forget that particular imposition. Despite myself, a reluctant smile tugged at my lips. Yes, thank you for the reminder. You're welcome. He sipped his tea with surprising delicacy for hands gnarled with arthritis. Excellent brew. Ceylon with a hint of bergamot. I nodded, momentarily disarmed by his accuracy. My father's preferred blend. I order it from a specialty shop in London, Stanley's on Portobello Road. They supplied the faculty lounge at Oxford during my visiting professorship in '82. For a fleeting moment, I saw him differently, not as an imposition or a problem to be managed, but as a person with a history as rich and complex as my own. It was an uncomfortable realization, acknowledging I'd viewed him with the same dismissive lens I resented in my own family. Now that we've established my tea preferences and your British heritage, Arthur continued, breaking the spell, perhaps we should address the proverbial elephant. What exactly shall we do about our inconsiderate children? I set my cup down with a decisive click. First, I'm calling Robert. This is completely unacceptable. Arthur's expression turned shrewd. Before you do, consider this. They're likely already at sea, conveniently beyond reliable phone reception. A quick check of my cell phone confirmed his suspicion. A text had arrived while I was unpacking. Boarding now. Signal spotty on ship. We'll check in when we can. Arthur likes PBS and classical music. You'll get along great. Unbelievable, I muttered. They've planned this escape thoroughly. Indeed. Arthur leaned back, studying me with those penetrating blue eyes. Tell me, Margaret, have they been pushing you to downsize recently? Perhaps suggesting retirement communities or condominiums with amenities for active seniors? The question struck uncomfortably close to home. How did you know? Because Bethany has been sending me brochures for Sunset Palms Retirement Village for 6 months, he replied dryly, after spending precisely 3 hours with me at her mother's funeral. Apparently, I made quite an impression, and now they've thrown us together. I trailed off as a new, unsettling thought emerged. Wait, you don't think... Arthur nodded grimly. Oh, I absolutely think this little cruise adventure is a convenient cover for a more calculated plan. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Mom and Arthur got along? They could share that big house, or better yet, a nice 2-bedroom unit at Sunset Palms. 2 elderly relatives managed with one convenient solution. The idea was so presumptuous, so manipulative, that I nearly knocked over my teacup in indignation. That's devious, condescending, a plot worthy of a mediocre soap opera. All of the above, Arthur supplied helpfully. I stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen with restless energy. I've lived in this house for over 40 years. I have no intention of sharing it with anyone, much less a cantankerous old man. He raised an eyebrow, challenging me to deny the description. I was going to say stranger, I finished primly. Of course you were. His tone made it clear he didn't believe me for a moment. Regardless, it seems we have a common problem and potentially a common purpose. I stopped pacing. Which is to ensure that this little matchmaking scheme fails so spectacularly that they never attempt such manipulation again. He set his teacup down with deliberate precision. The question is whether you have the imagination and fortitude for what that might entail. There was something in his tone, a hint of mischief and challenge combined, that sparked a long-dormant part of me. Before I was Margaret Walsh, respectable piano teacher and pillar of the community, I had been Maggie, who once drove from Boston to New York on a whim to see Horowitz play at Carnegie Hall, who had taught herself Portuguese one summer simply because she loved the sound of it. "What exactly did you have in mind?" I asked, returning to my seat. Arthur's smile was slow and surprisingly wicked for a man his age. "First, we need to establish the current situation. They believe they've left 2 helpless senior citizens to fumble through a few days together. They expect phone calls demanding explanations, perhaps some righteous indignation followed by grudging acceptance." I nodded, following his reasoning. "So instead, we give them absolutely nothing." "Precisely. No calls, no texts. Complete silence for the first 24 hours. "That will certainly make them nervous," I acknowledged. "But is it enough?" "Oh, that's just the opening act, my dear." Arthur leaned forward, suddenly animated, erasing decades from his appearance. "After the silence comes confusion, cryptic, increasingly concerning messages, references to unexpected developments that are never quite explained. The psychological torture of uncertainty." I should have been appalled at the gleeful vindictiveness in his tone. Instead, I found myself leaning forward, equally engaged. "What kind of messages?" "Everything's fine. No need to worry," he suggested. Followed hours later by, "Situation under control now. Don't concern yourselves." "Please don't be angry when you see the living room," I added, warming to the game. "The fire department was very understanding," Arthur countered, his eyes twinkling. A laugh escaped me, a genuine, unrestrained sound I hardly recognized as my own. How long had it been? "You're terrible." "I prefer creatively vindictive," he corrected, "and you, Margaret Walsh, are not nearly as proper as you pretend to be." The observation should have offended me. Instead, it felt like recognition of a self I'd nearly forgotten existed. "So," Arthur said, extending his hand across the table, "are we agreed? Shall we teach our presumptuous children a lesson in respecting their elders?" I hesitated only briefly before taking his offered hand. His skin was paper-thin but surprisingly warm, his grip firmer than I'd expected. "Agreed," I said, feeling a flutter of anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. "Though I should warn you, Mr. Caldwell." "Arthur, please," he amended. "Arthur, I should warn you that if we're to share this house for 4 days, there are certain rules that must be observed. I run a very orderly household." He studied me for a moment, then nodded solemnly. "I would expect nothing less. And I, in turn, must warn you that I am physically incapable of leaving my breakfast dishes anywhere but the sink, never the dishwasher. And I read aloud when I come across particularly interesting passages in books. I sing along to Puccini while cooking, I countered, quite loudly, I'm told. I require complete silence during Jeopardy. I alphabetize my spices and will know if they're out of order. We regarded each other across the table, two immovable objects assessing the possibility of coexistence. Then Arthur smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. I believe, Margaret, that this may be the beginning of a very interesting Thanksgiving. Our psychological warfare began that evening. After I'd shown Arthur to the guest room and we'd sorted out bathroom logistics, he in the morning, me in the evening, a schedule honouring both his early rising habits and my preference for night showers, we settled in. The medication mentioned in Robert's note turned out to be a simple blood pressure pill, which Arthur was perfectly capable of managing himself. Thank you very much. I've been taking it for 15 years, he'd said dryly when I'd mentioned the reminder. Somehow I've survived without your son's supervision until now. Now, settled in the living room with a hastily assembled dinner of cold turkey sandwiches, the irony of eating the intended Thanksgiving bird in such an unceremonious fashion wasn't lost on either of us. We crafted our first strategic communication. The key, Arthur explained, holding my phone between his gnarled fingers, is to say nothing while implying everything. We want them imagining the worst without giving them anything concrete to react to. I nodded, oddly exhilarated by the mischief we were orchestrating. So we don't mention being upset about their departure. Precisely. That's what they're expecting. Righteous indignation, demands for explanation. We give them something far more unsettling. Pleasant acceptance, followed by cryptic concern. He typed slowly, but with surprising accuracy. Hope you're enjoying the cruise. Arthur and I are getting along splendidly. No need to worry about earlier. Everything under control now. Love, Mum. I questioned the words, peering over his shoulder. That's beautifully vague. They'll be wondering what happened. Exactly. Arthur hit send with a flourish, a glint in his eye. Now we wait. We didn't have to wait long. Minutes later, my phone chimed. Robert's message flashed across the screen. What happened earlier? Is everything okay? Arthur's smile was that of a chess master who'd just cornered a queen. Now we go silent for at least 2 hours. Let that question marinate. I found myself impressed by his psychological acuity, even as a chill of doubt pricked me. They'll be worried. They'll be wondering, he corrected, the distinction sharp. There's a difference, and considering they abandoned us without consultation on a major holiday, I'd say a little wondering is the least they deserve. Put that way, it was difficult to argue. I set the phone aside, my gaze lingering on my unexpected conspirator. In the warm lamplight, Arthur Caldwell presented a portrait of dignified aging. White hair neatly combed, his cardigan free of any betraying food stains, his posture remarkably straight. You're staring, he observed, without looking up from the newspaper he'd retrieved from my coffee table. Do I have turkey on my face, or are you reconsidering our alliance? Neither, I admitted. I'm just trying to reconcile the Arthur Caldwell in front of me with Bethy's descriptions. He folded the paper with meticulous care. And what precisely did my stepdaughter say about me? That you're impossible to please, set in your ways, and say whatever comes to mind without consideration for others' feelings. To my surprise, he chuckled, a dry, almost theatrical sound. All fair assessments, though incomplete. Did she mention I directed the theatre department at Berkeley for 30 years? Or that I speak 4 languages? Or perhaps that I make an excellent cocoa? She did not. Curious what details one chooses to omit when constructing a narrative. He picked up a book from my side table, a biography of Glenn Gould I'd been reading before the retreat. A pianist with opinions as strong as his technique. Are you familiar with his 1955 recording of the Goldberg Variations? The question startled me. I teach it to my advanced students, I replied, the words coming easily. The tempo is controversial, but the clarity of counterpoint is unmatched. Arthur's eyes lit with genuine interest. You're a musician? Bethany failed to mention that as well. Piano teacher, 42 years, I confirmed. Retired now, but I still have a few dedicated students. Another omission from their calculus, he mused. They've matched us based on age and perceived difficulty, without considering what we might actually have in common. He tapped the book thoughtfully. Do you play Bach yourself? Every morning, I admitted, a small smile touching my lips. The well-tempered clavier is my meditation. Would you? He hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty, the first I'd seen crossing his face. Would you play something? It's been months since I've heard live music. The retirement community's idea of entertainment is a gentleman with a keyboard who insists on performing The Girl from Ipanema at every opportunity. The request was unexpected, yet not unwelcome. Music had always been my refuge, my clearest form of communication. Without a word, I moved to the baby grand in the corner of my living room, my most treasured possession, purchased with my first year's teaching earnings and meticulously maintained through decades. I settled on the bench, took a moment to centre myself, and began the prelude in C major from Book 1 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. The familiar arpeggios flowed from my fingers, filling the living room with Bach's mathematical perfection. I closed my eyes, letting muscle memory guide me through the piece I'd played thousands of times. When I finished, opening my eyes, I found Arthur watching me with an expression of profound appreciation. You play beautifully, he said simply. With precision, but not at the expense of musicality. Rare, in my experience. The compliment, delivered without hyperbole or unnecessary elaboration, affected me more than flowery praise ever could have. Thank you. Would you play something else? He asked. Something less structured, perhaps. Chopin. I considered for a moment, then nodded. I think the situation calls for Debussy, actually. Impressionistic harmonies filled the room. I found myself playing for Arthur with the same focus I usually reserved for a recital. There was something in his listening and attentiveness, a genuine engagement that demanded reciprocal respect. When the final notes faded, a comfortable silence settled between us. The chime of my phone broke the moment. Robert again. Mom, what do you mean? Everything under control now? What happened? Please call when you get this. Arthur glanced at the clock. Only 90 minutes. He broke sooner than I anticipated. He's always been anxious by nature, I explained, a twinge of maternal guilt surfacing. Perhaps we should stay the course, Arthur finished firmly. Remember why we're doing this. They treated us like interchangeable elderly inconveniences to be managed and manipulated. A few hours of uncertainty is a small price for them to pay. Put that way, my resolve strengthened. I typed a new message. No need to worry, dear. Arthur was tremendously helpful. His theatre experience came in quite handy. Enjoying a lovely evening now. Signal spotty here too. Must be the weather. Arthur read it over my shoulder and nodded approvingly. Excellent. The reference to my theatre experience suggests some kind of performance or staging was required, while tremendously helpful implies a situation that needed assistance, masterfully vague. The spotty signal excuse gives us reason not to answer calls, I added, though I borrowed that from their own playbook, which feels a bit unoriginal. In psychological warfare, Arthur declared, stifling a yawn, efficacy trumps originality. I believe I'll retire for the evening. Tomorrow we escalate. As I prepared for bed later that night, I found myself reflecting on the strange turn my Thanksgiving had taken. Instead of the predictable family dinner with its familiar tensions and performative gratitude, I was engaged in an elaborate deception with a man I'd known less than 8 hours. Stranger still was how energized I felt by the enterprise. When was the last time I'd felt this engaged, this mentally stimulated? My life had settled into such comfortable routines that I'd stopped noticing their limitations, teaching the same pieces to different students, attending the same community events with the same acquaintances, preparing holiday meals that followed identical patterns year after year. Arthur Caldwell, with his acerbic wit and theatrical scheming, had introduced an unexpected variable into my carefully ordered existence. As I drifted towards sleep, I realized I was actually looking forward to tomorrow's developments in our little drama. A feeling so unfamiliar it took me a moment to recognize it as anticipation. Whatever our children had intended in throwing us together, I doubted very much it was this particular alliance. The thought brought a smile to my face as I finally surrendered to sleep. The fire department was very understanding about the whole situation. I looked up from my coffee to find Arthur standing in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in pressed slacks and a cardigan despite the early hour. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd clearly shaved with meticulous care. Whatever his physical limitations, he evidently maintained exacting standards for his appearance. "Excuse me?" I questioned, still foggy from a night of unusually vivid dreams. "Our next message," he clarified, moving to the coffee pot with carefully measured steps. "I thought we might escalate to implied property damage. The fire department comment should send them into a proper panic." I checked the clock. 7:15 a.m. "You've been planning psychological warfare since dawn, I see. Insomnia has its uses." He poured coffee with a steady hand, then joined me at the kitchen table. "I've also taken the liberty of silencing your phone. 3 missed calls and 7 text messages since 6 a.m. Your son is quite persistent." "Robert has always been a worrier," I acknowledged, feeling another twinge of guilt. Even as a child, he needed constant reassurance. "And you've provided it faithfully, I imagine." There was no judgment in Arthur's tone, merely observation. Creating a pattern that continues into his adulthood, where he expects you to alleviate his anxiety while feeling perfectly comfortable creating anxiety for you. The assessment was uncomfortably accurate. How many times had I rearranged my schedule to accommodate Robert's concerns? How often had I prioritized his comfort over my own convenience? "They're on a cruise ship," I reminded both of us. "How much damage could our messages really do? They're supposed to be enjoying themselves." "Precisely the point," Arthur replied, sipping his coffee with evident appreciation. "Excellent brew, by the way. Their enjoyment comes at the expense of our autonomy. A little disruption seems a fair exchange." He had a point. I retrieved my phone and reviewed the mounting evidence of Robert's concern. "Mom, what's going on? What do you mean Arthur's theatre experience was helpful? Are you getting these messages? Please call when you can." "Mum, seriously, we're worried. What happened that needed to be under control? Bethany thinks you might have had a break-in. Is that what happened? We're trying to get the ship's satellite phone. We'll call when we can." "They're spiraling quite nicely," Arthur observed, reading over my shoulder. "The break-in theory is particularly inspired." "I wouldn't have thought of that." "We're being terrible," I said, though without much conviction. "We're being instructive," he corrected. "Now, about that fire department message." I hesitated, then typed, "Good morning from a beautiful Vermont day. No need for satellite calls. Everything's fine now." The fire department was understanding. Arthur's quick thinking had prevented any major damage, yet the message I crafted, now gleaming on my phone screen, said something else entirely, something sharper. "You raised such thoughtful concerns about my curtains last visit, and now you'll get those new ones you wanted. Enjoy your cruise." Arthur read it, a slow smile unfurling across his face. "The curtain detail is inspired," he approved, a low rumbling sound. "Specific enough to be credible yet completely mundane compared to the fire department reference. The emotional whiplash is exquisite." "I'm discovering a vindictive streak I didn't know I possessed," I admitted, thumb hovering, then pressing send before a wave of doubt could drown the satisfaction. "Not vindictive," Arthur corrected, his gaze sweeping my kitchen-organized cabinets, gleaming countertops. "Self-advocating. There's a difference." He turned back to me. "Now I believe breakfast is in order. Do you have eggs? I make an excellent omelette." "You cook?" The surprise escaped before I could temper it. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. I've lived alone for 20 years, Margaret. Contrary to popular belief, elderly men don't immediately lose all basic life skills upon their wives' passing. He moved with purpose, opening a cabinet with the almost casual confidence of someone at home in any kitchen. Clara, my wife, was an excellent cook, but she insisted I learn the fundamentals. Art, she'd say. If you can direct King Lear, you can manage a decent bechamel. The mental image this formal, somewhat intimidating man, gently chided by his wife, made me smile. The eggs are in the refrigerator door, cheese in the drawer beneath the vegetables. As he set to work, demonstrating surprising dexterity, I found myself watching him, a new question forming in my mind. What else had I misjudged? How much of my initial resentment had been based on genuine grievance, and how much on the same age-related assumptions I deplored in my own family? "You're doing it again," Arthur noted without turning from the stove. His voice was calm but carried, staring, thinking too loudly. "I don't know what you mean," I protested, feigning innocence. "You have very expressive eyebrows, Margaret. They practically semaphore your thoughts across the room." He expertly folded the omelette with a flick of his wrist, the hiss of the pan a counterpoint to his words. Right now they're saying, I've misjudged this strange old man and am reconsidering my assumptions. I laughed despite myself. Are you always this perceptive? Or am I particularly transparent? Both, I suspect. He slid a perfectly executed omelette onto a plate, presenting it with a small flourish. Breakfast is served. The omelette was, indeed, excellent light, flavourful, with herbs I didn't recall purchasing. As we ate, a dam broke within me, and I found myself sharing stories of past Thanksgivings. The year Robert had attempted to deep-fry a turkey in the garage. The time Bethy's first attempt at pumpkin pie had resulted in an impromptu fire drill. They weren't always like this, I found myself explaining, though Arthur had asked for no justification. So managing. Robert used to call just to chat, not to check whether I'd remembered to change the furnace filter or schedule a doctor's appointment. The shift usually comes gradually, Arthur observed, dabbing his lips with a napkin. A concerned question here. An unnecessary reminder there. By the time you recognize the pattern, the parent-child dynamic has inverted. He met my gaze. When did it happen for you? A shadow crossed his expressive face. With Clara's illness, pancreatic cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to... Well, he cleared his throat. Bethany flew in exactly twice. Once when her mother was diagnosed, once for the funeral. In between, she managed everything by phone, including my transition to appropriate care. The quotation marks were audible in his tone, heavy with unspoken weight. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it about Clara and about Bethy's response. He waved away the sympathy with a gesture that didn't quite disguise its impact. Ancient history. 3 years now, though apparently long enough for Bethany to determine I need proper supervision, despite living independently quite successfully. Before I could respond, my phone chimed. An incoming video call request? Robert. Using the ship's Wi-Fi or satellite system, I mumbled, showing Arthur the screen. Shall we answer and end their misery? Not yet, he decided after a moment's consideration. Decline with a message that you're helping the insurance adjuster right now and will call later. I did as suggested, setting the phone aside. They'll be beside themselves by now. Good, Arthur said firmly, a mischievous glint in his eye. Let them experience a fraction of the helplessness they imposed on us. Now, what shall we do with our day? He paused, a challenge in his voice. I assume you had plans beyond psychological torment. The question caught me off guard. What would I normally do the day after Thanksgiving? Practice piano, certainly. Perhaps read, call a few friends to exchange holiday stories. None of it seemed particularly compelling in the face of our current conspiracy. Actually, I said, a spontaneous decision blossoming, I think we should redecorate. Arthur's bushy eyebrows rose in question. If we're claiming fire damage required new curtains, we should follow through, I explained, warming to the idea. I've disliked those living room drapes for years. Too formal, too heavy. And while we're at it, perhaps the furniture arrangement could use reconsideration as well. Theatrical verisimilitude, Arthur nodded approvingly. I like your commitment to the role, Margaret. Not just that, I admitted. I've been considering changes for some time, but inertia is a powerful force. This seems like the perfect opportunity. A home improvement project with a reluctant senior citizen you've known for less than 24 hours, Arthur mused, a dry smile playing on his lips. I can see no possible downside to this plan. Despite his tone, I detected genuine amusement rather than offence. If we're to convince them we've bonded during their absence, we should have something to show for it, I pointed out reasonably. And you have theatre experience. Surely you've designed a set or two in your time. Designed, directed, occasionally dismantled in fits of artistic temperament, he confirmed, a faint smile. Very well, Margaret. Let's redecorate. Though I should warn you, I have strong opinions about textile patterns. I would expect nothing less, I replied, surprised by my own enthusiasm. When was the last time I'd made a spontaneous decision to change anything in my carefully maintained home? We'll need to go shopping. There's a fabric store in town that should have suitable options. Arthur's expression turned hesitant. Shopping might be challenging. My mobility isn't what it once was. He tapped his cane with a self-deprecating gesture. Stairs and extended walking are particularly troublesome. It was the first acknowledgement of physical limitation he'd made, and I appreciated both his honesty and his evident discomfort with admitting vulnerability. We'll take my car, I said matter-of-factly. The fabric store has a ramp and wide aisles, and we can have lunch at Gibson's. They have excellent soup and a table by the window that's easy to access. The relief in his eyes was quickly masked by his usual dry humour. Planning my geriatric needs already? You've missed your calling as a nurse. Not at all, I replied evenly. I'm simply being practical and selfish. I happen to want soup at Gibson's, and your company would make the expedition more interesting. He studied me for a moment, then nodded with surprising formality. In that case, Margaret, I accept your invitation, though I insist on buying lunch, given your gracious hospitality. Agreed, I said, extending my hand as if sealing a business deal. Though I should warn you, I have strong opinions about window treatments. I would expect nothing less, he echoed, his handshake firm despite his gnarled fingers. As we cleared breakfast dishes together, him washing, me drying, in a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural, my phone buzzed again. Another frantic text from Robert. Mum, insurance adjuster, what happened? We're trying to get off at the next port if something's seriously wrong. Arthur glanced at the message and smiled, that mischievous smile that transformed his scholarly appearance into something almost impish. Perfect, he pronounced. The next phase of our plan is proceeding exactly on schedule. The fabric store was exactly as I remembered, a haven of textures and patterns tucked between a hardware store and a bakery on Main Street. What I hadn't anticipated was how different the experience would be with Arthur in tow. His observations were incisive, his opinions unvarnished, but unexpectedly insightful. That shade of burgundy has all the subtlety of a community theatre Lady Macbeth, he pronounced when I held up a heavy damask. Attractive in theory, overwhelming in practice. And what would you suggest, Professor Caldwell? I asked, amused rather than offended by his candour. He moved along the aisle, cane tapping thoughtfully against the floor before stopping at a display of lighter fabrics. This, he said, indicating a steel blue linen with a subtle herringbone texture. It has character without dominating the room, and it would complement that Aubusson rug in your living room rather than competing with it. I examined his selection, surprised by both his memory for detail. He'd noticed my rug and his aesthetic judgment. The blue was indeed perfect, sophisticated without being stuffy, substantial without being heavy. Not at all what I'd have chosen for myself, yet somehow exactly right for the space. "You have a good eye," I acknowledged, adding the fabric to our growing selection. "I designed sets for 4 decades," he reminded me, a faint pride in his voice. "Fabric can make or break a production's entire aesthetic." By the time we'd finished our selections, we had materials for not just living room curtains, but new throw pillows and a runner for my entry hall. The total was more than I'd planned to spend, but the prospect of refreshing rooms I'd left unchanged for nearly a decade was unexpectedly exhilarating. "Lunch?" I suggested as we loaded our purchases into my car. "Gibson's is just down the block." Arthur nodded, a flicker of fatigue crossing his face as he leaned just a bit more heavily on his cane than before. Our morning expedition had clearly taxed him, yet not a word of complaint. It was a subtle gesture that chipped away at my assumptions, revealing a determination to minimize his limitations, perhaps to a fault. Inside Gibson's, the air hummed with the after-Thanksgiving rush, but Maureen, the owner, spotted us instantly. "Margaret!" she called, her voice cutting through the cheerful din as she wove through tables. "We missed you yesterday. The retreat went well?" "Very centering," I replied, embracing her quick hug. "Maureen, this is Arthur Caldwell, a family friend visiting for the holiday weekend." Arthur extended a hand with an old-world grace, his eyes holding a mischievous glint. "A pleasure, Maureen." "Margaret promises your soup is unparalleled in 3 counties. Maureen laughed, clearly charmed. "Charmer. For that, I'll give you the window table and throw in dessert." She gestured us to follow. As she led us to a sun-drenched table overlooking the town square, I caught Arthur's subtle wink. He'd used his considerable charisma strategically, securing prime seating without a single mention of his mobility. "Clever man." "Family friend?" he mused after Maureen left with our orders, his tone lightly sardonic. "An interesting choice of descriptor for your reluctant houseguest. Would you have preferred the stranger my children abandoned with me for Thanksgiving?" I countered, a wry smile playing on my lips. His eyes crinkled with amusement. "Accurate, if unwieldy for casual introductions. Though we've progressed beyond strangers at this point, I think. Reluctant co-conspirators, at minimum." "Unlikely allies," I offered. "I can accept that designation." He glanced out the window at the gazebo framed by ancient oaks in the town square. "Charming town. You've lived here long?" 43 years in the same house, I confirmed. Robert was 5 when we moved from Boston. My husband James had accepted a position at the college, the music department. "Chemistry," Arthur guessed. Actually, I was the musician in the family. A familiar pang, soft but persistent, accompanied the memory of James. Not the sharp grief of early widowhood, but the gentler ache of a long, empty space. He passed 12 years ago, heart attack while shoveling snow. Arthur nodded, offering no platitudes about better places or time healing wounds. "Clara was 15 years ago," he said instead, his voice quiet. "Seems both yesterday and several lifetimes passed, depending on the day." "Exactly that," I agreed, a touch of gratitude in my voice for his understanding. Our soup arrived then, butternut squash with apple and sage, accompanied by crusty bread, still warm and fragrant. We ate in companionable silence, the simple pleasure of good food weaving a quiet communion between us. "Your son," Arthur broke the quiet eventually, his gaze thoughtful. "Does he know how capable you actually are? The accomplished musician, the woman who can coordinate a complex holiday meal while simultaneously teaching piano and maintaining a home." The question caught me off guard. Of course he does. He grew up with me. "Children often see their parents through the narrowest of lenses," Arthur observed, focused entirely on their role as mother or father, missing the fuller humanity beneath those titles. I considered this, breaking off another piece of bread. "Perhaps you're right. Robert was young when James died, just finishing college. He stepped into a sort of protective role almost immediately and never stepped out of it," Arthur surmised, even as you demonstrated year after year that you could manage perfectly well. It comes from a place of love, I said, feeling compelled to defend my son despite our current scheme. Most control does in families. Arthur's tone held no judgment, only quiet understanding. We tell ourselves we're protecting each other when we're really protecting ourselves from the fear of loss, of change, of confronting mortality. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed insistently. Another message from Robert. "Mom, we're getting off at tomorrow's port and flying home. Clearly, something serious has happened. Please just tell us if you're safe." I showed Arthur the message, a sudden stab of guilt piercing me. Perhaps we've taken this far enough. He studied the text thoughtfully. The next port is likely Nassau. If it's a standard Caribbean itinerary, that means they'd be sacrificing at least 2 days of their cruise and paying exorbitant last-minute airfare. Exactly why we should stop, I insisted. This was meant to be a small lesson, not a ruined vacation. Arthur's expression softened. You're right. Of course, escalation has its limits. He thought for a moment. What if we pivot? Not ending the game entirely, but redirecting it. What do you suggest? A message that alleviates their immediate panic, but maintains our narrative of unexpected developments. He considered, then dictated. Everything is absolutely fine. No need to change your travel plans. The fire was just a small kitchen incident, completely under control. Arthur and I have been having a wonderful time redecorating and getting to know each other. Such an unexpected connection. Enjoy the rest of your cruise without worry. I typed as he spoke, then showed him the result. The quotation marks around fire are a nice touch, I noted, suggesting we're using it as a euphemism for something else entirely. And unexpected connection carries just enough ambiguity to keep them intrigued without panicking, he agreed. It shifts their anxiety from concern for safety to curiosity about our developing relationship, precisely what they hoped for, though not in the way they intended. I pressed send, then set my phone aside. You're quite strategic, Arthur Caldwell. 4 decades of academic politics teaches one to plan several moves ahead, he replied with a faint smile. Though I'll admit, this particular game is more enjoyable than faculty budget meetings. After finishing our soup and the promised dessert, a maple creme brulee, Arthur declared transcendent. We made our way back to my car. I noticed he moved more slowly now, the morning's activities clearly taking their toll. Perhaps we should save the actual redecorating for tomorrow, I suggested as we drove home, careful to frame it as a scheduling preference rather than accommodation for his fatigue. Probably wise, he agreed, seeing through the pretense but accepting it graciously. Today's reconnaissance, tomorrow's action. Good theatre requires proper pacing. Back home, I insisted Arthur rest while I prepared a light dinner. To my surprise, he didn't argue, settling in the living room with one of James's old poetry anthologies. By the time I'd assembled a simple meal of reheated soup from my pre-retreat preparations and fresh bread from Gibson's, he'd fallen asleep in the armchair, book open on his lap. I watched him for a moment. This proud, opinionated man who'd entered my life as little more than an imposition and was rapidly becoming something closer to a friend. In sleep, the sharp edges of his personality softened, revealing the vulnerability he worked so hard to disguise while awake. Leaving him to rest, I moved to my piano, playing softly. Debussy's Clair de Lune, its gentle impressionism filling the house with a peaceful melancholy. Tomorrow would bring more scheming, more redecorating, more unexpected alliance with this unusual man. But for now, in this quiet moment, I found myself oddly grateful for the disruption of my solitary routine. My phone buzzed with a response from Robert, a relieved but clearly confused message about being glad we were safe, but wanting more details soon. I silenced it without responding. The game would continue tomorrow. Tonight was for music, for quiet, for the strange peace of shared solitude with an unexpected ally. I'm not convinced about this furniture arrangement, I said, stepping back to survey our handiwork. We'd spent the morning rearranging my living room, a task that had proven more physically demanding than anticipated. The sofa seems too dominant now. Arthur, slightly winded but triumphant, shook his head. You're seeing it with memory eyes, not fresh ones. The old arrangement prioritized the fireplace, which is lovely but unused for most of the year. This, he gestured expansively, this creates conversation spaces, invites interaction rather than parallel sitting. I considered his point, trying to view the room objectively. We'd moved my sofa perpendicular to its long-time position, floated 2 armchairs across from it, and repositioned side tables to create distinct seating areas. The piano remained in its corner, but now it felt more integrated into the room rather than sequestered in its own zone. It does feel more deliberate, I admitted, less like furniture that happened to accumulate over decades, which is precisely what it was. Most homes evolve organically rather than through intentional design, Arthur noted without judgment. We add pieces as needed, position them for convenience, then cease to see them at all. He was right, of course. When had I last actually looked at my living room, really examined the space I moved through daily? Like so many aspects of my life, it had become invisible through familiarity, comfortable, but unconsidered. The curtains are next, I declared, turning to the fabric we'd draped over a chair. Though I confess I haven't sewn anything this substantial in years. Fortuitously, you have access to theatrical expertise, Arthur replied, lowering himself carefully onto the newly positioned sofa. I've constructed everything from Renaissance ball gowns to alien tentacles in my time. Curtains are well within my capabilities. I raised an eyebrow. You sew? Costume design was part of my theatrical training, though I specialized in direction and set design. Later, he examined the fabric with a professional eye. Do you have a sewing machine, or shall we proceed by hand? In the spare bedroom closet, I replied, still processing this new dimension of Arthur's capabilities, though I haven't used it in ages. It may need cleaning. Let's investigate, he suggested, leveraging himself up with his cane, his eyes bright with a new project. Unless you'd prefer to rest first, Arthur's voice cut through the quiet hum of the afternoon, thick with the hours we'd spent. We've been at this for several hours. Weighing his concern despite the fatigue etched around his own eyes was a surprising tenderness. A current of warmth unexpected ran through me. I'm perfectly fine, I assured him, perhaps too quickly, too loudly. Though a fresh pot of coffee that was a thought I could get behind. In the kitchen, as the scent of brewing coffee began to unfurl, Arthur drifted to the refrigerator. His gaze, sharp and analytical, swept over the collection of magnetized photographs. Robert's family in various stages of growth, a scattering of older images of James and me, younger, almost forgotten. You have your father's profile, he observed, a finger tracing the faded edges of a 1970s snapshot. And you've passed it to Robert. The genetic echo is quite striking. I glanced at the picture, a relic I saw daily without truly seeing. He was right. The unmistakable lineage, spanning 3 generations, was suddenly vivid. James always used to say Robert was more Walsh than Sullivan, my determination, my ear for music. But what had Robert inherited from his own father? The question, hovering in the steam from the coffee, gave me pause. His analytical mind, yes. His patience with detail. And then a memory, a flash of pure joy, brought a smile. His terrible puns, I murmured. James could reduce a room to groans with his wordplay. A valuable inheritance, Arthur said, surprisingly serious. My Clara was similarly inclined toward linguistic mischief. Ah, she'd say, you put the pun in punctilious. His impression of his late wife was so rich with affection I could almost conjure her. Twinkling eyes, quick wit, the perfect counterpoint to his own formidable intellect. You miss her, I stated softly, handing him a mug of coffee, its warmth spreading into my palm. Every day, he confirmed, his gaze distant, lost in a landscape only he could see. Though the shape of the missing changes over time, less raw now, more integrated into who I've become without her. His words resonated with a heartbreaking accuracy that mirrored my own evolving grief. Exactly that, I breathed, the simple acknowledgement a bridge between us. We carried our coffee to the spare bedroom, its air thick with the dust of disuse. From the closet, I unearthed my old sewing machine. To my relief, it was in better condition than I'd envisioned. A mere film of dust, but otherwise intact. Singer 301, Arthur noted approvingly. A workhorse. Clara had the same model. While I set about cleaning the machine, Arthur, with a precision born of long practice, measured and marked our fabric. He plucked pins from my antique sewing basket, his large hands surprisingly deft as he crafted perfect seams. We worked in tandem, an effortless coordination settling between us, as if this quiet domesticity was a dance we'd rehearsed countless times. By late afternoon, one set of curtains hung, triumphant, and we were well into the second. "We make an efficient team," I observed, feeding fabric through the humming machine while Arthur guided its path. "Indeed," he agreed, a dry chuckle in his voice. "Though I suspect our children would be shocked to witness this domestic harmony. It rather undermines their carefully constructed perception of us as difficult, solitary creatures. Speaking of which." I glanced at my phone. 3 new messages from Robert, each a frantic probe into our unexpected connection. Should we respond? Arthur's eyes, glinting with mischief, held mine. Oh, absolutely. But let's give them something specific, yet exquisitely ambiguous. Really make them wonder. A smile, slow and delicious, spread across my face. I typed, "So lovely to hear from you. Arthur and I have been quite busy, completely rearranging the living room and sewing new curtains. You wouldn't recognize the place. We discovered we share a passion for Bach and Dostoevsky." I paused, then added, "Arthur plays the most challenging Scrabble game I've had in years, though I beat him soundly last night. No need to check in so frequently. We're having a marvellous time. Kiss the children for me." Arthur read it over my shoulder, a nod of silent approval. The casual mention of spending the evening playing Scrabble is inspired. It suggests comfortable domesticity without overt romantic overtones. "We didn't actually play Scrabble," I pointed out. "A minor detail. We certainly could have," he countered, his gaze drifting to the antique clock on my bedside table. "Though perhaps we should, to maintain narrative consistency. I am, in fact, quite formidable at word games." "Is that a challenge, Professor Caldwell?" My own playfulness surprised me, a lightness blooming in my chest. "Merely an observation, Mrs. Walsh," he replied, a mock formality in his tone. "Though if you're proposing a contest, I would be remiss in declining." As the afternoon light softened, painting the room in hues of amber and rose, we paused our sewing. In the kitchen, I pulled a homemade quiche from the freezer, reheating it alongside a fresh salad, while Arthur meticulously arranged the Scrabble board and tiles. "House rules?" he inquired as we finally settled at the table. "Standard dictionary words only, no proper nouns," I dictated, serving the quiche. "And no deliberate blocking just to be difficult." "Ah, you've played with strategists before," he observed, accepting a plate with a gracious nod. "I promise to focus on word construction rather than defensive play." The game that unfolded was a symphony of intellect, a thrilling linguistic duel. Arthur's vocabulary was breathtaking, his strategy subtle but devastating. I found myself unearthing linguistic knowledge I hadn't touched since my college days, when James and I would engage in marathon Scrabble games during snowbound weekends. "Quixotic," Arthur announced, placing his tiles with a flourish, hitting a triple word score. "That's 72 points, I believe." I groaned in appreciation. "Impressive. Though you've left an opening for—" I laid down my tiles, forming Byzantine, connecting to his X, and extending to a double word. "That's 57 points, I calculated, a thrill of triumph in my voice. "Well played," he acknowledged, studying the board with genuine respect. "You're a more formidable opponent than anticipated." "You assumed I'd be an easy mark," I challenged, though without genuine offense. Not at all. I simply didn't expect such strategic aggression from a piano teacher. Classical musicians are among the most competitive people on earth, I informed him, a mischievous glint in my eye. You should see the psychological warfare at conservatory auditions. He laughed then, a rich, unguarded sound I hadn't heard before, and it filled the kitchen with an unexpected warmth. A fair point. Clara always said the difference between a symphony orchestra and a pack of wolves was that wolves recognize when their prey is dead. The evening unfolded in a comfortable rhythm of competitive play and increasingly intimate conversation. I found myself sharing stories I hadn't recalled in years, anecdotes about James, my early career struggles, Robert's childhood. Arthur reciprocated with tales of theatrical disasters, narrowly averted, the Byzantine politics of academia, and his own parenting missteps with his 2 sons, both now living on the West Coast. They called dutifully on holidays, he explained when I asked about their absence during his recent health struggles. Send appropriate gifts on birthdays. But distance, both geographical and emotional, has a way of calcifying into permanence. The raw undercurrent of loneliness in his matter-of-fact description resonated deeply. How different, truly, was my relationship with Robert? Physical proximity, I knew, was no guarantee against emotional distance. When the game finally concluded, Arthur winning by a mere 12 points, a margin tantalizing enough to demand a rematch, we cleared the board in companionable silence. "Thank you," Arthur said unexpectedly, as I placed the game box back on its shelf. "For what? Allowing you to trounce me at Scrabble?" "For today," he clarified, his tone uncharacteristically earnest. "For the sewing, and the rearranging, and this game, for treating me as a person with something to contribute, not merely an elderly inconvenience to be managed." The simple gratitude caught me off guard, a small, tender ache in my chest. "You've been far from inconvenient," I said honestly. "In fact, I've rather enjoyed having company, even company that arrived under such manipulative circumstances." His smile held a hint of his usual wryness, but also something genuinely warm. "Perhaps we should send our children a thank you note for their matchmaking efforts after all. Not for the reasons they intended, but for the surprising friendship they inadvertently facilitated." "Friendship," I echoed, testing the word on my tongue. "Yes, I believe that's what this is becoming." A notification chimed on my phone, another message from Robert. This one included a photo, the family on the cruise ship, their smiles slightly strained, an almost desperate effort to appear carefree while clearly still burdened by concern. "They look miserable," Arthur observed, glancing at the image, conscience weighing on their Caribbean paradise. "Good," I replied, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "Perhaps it will make them think twice before making decisions for us without consultation in the future." Arthur raised an imaginary glass in salute. "To consequences. May they be educational for all involved," I mimicked his gesture with my water glass. "And to unexpected alliances, may they continue to surprise us." Or, Sunday morning dawned with a crystalline clarity unique to late autumn in Vermont. The air, bitingly sharp with the promise of winter, still carried echoes of fading warmth in the sunlight. I woke earlier than usual, my mind already cycling through the day's potential activities before my feet even touched the floor. This anticipation, this subtle eagerness to begin the day, felt wholly unfamiliar after months of mornings that had blurred into an indistinguishable sameness. 3 days with Arthur Caldwell had somehow disrupted patterns I hadn't even realized were stagnant. Wrapping my robe around myself, I padded quietly downstairs, expecting to find the kitchen empty at this early hour. Instead, Arthur stood at the counter methodically slicing fruit for what appeared to be an elaborate breakfast. "You're up early," I observed, gravitating toward the coffee pot already 3/4 full. "Lifelong habit," he replied without turning. "Academic schedules are unforgiving, and I found early mornings the only reliable time for uninterrupted thought. Now, despite retirement's supposed freedoms, My body refuses to acknowledge any wake-up time past 6. Mine as well, I admitted, the rich aroma of coffee filling the sun-drenched living room. Usually this hour found me at the piano, the morning light perfect for sight reading. I poured for both of us, and he accepted with a gracious nod. I heard you yesterday around 5:30, he remarked, his gaze distant. Boccherini's Italian concerto, if I'm not mistaken, the Presto movement. The observation surprised me, so few people truly listened. You have a good ear. Clara was the musician in our household, he said, returning to his meticulous assembly of fruit and batter. Cellist with the Berkeley Symphony for 20 years. Some knowledge was bound to seep in. Another layer peeled back from the formal man with his literary illusions. Decades, immersed in classical music through his wife. The shared cultural territory felt significant, a subtle ribbon connecting our disparate lives. What are you making? I asked, peering over his shoulder at the vibrant spread. Dutch baby pancake, he replied, a faint wistfulness in his tone. Clara's specialty, though mine is a pale imitation. I thought perhaps, given it's Sunday. He trailed off, suddenly uncertain, surveying his culinary efforts in my kitchen. It looks wonderful, I assured him quickly, a genuine warmth rising in me. I usually just have toast and coffee. Nutritionally inadequate, he declared, his confidence instantly restored. Breakfast should fortify one for the day's intellectual and physical demands. And what demands do you anticipate for today, Professor Caldwell? I teased, amused by his professorial air. He considered sliding the pan into the preheated oven with careful precision. The curtains require completion. The throw pillows await their new covers. And, he hesitated, a flicker of something uncharacteristic. Shyness? Crossing his features. I thought perhaps you might be willing to play more extensively for an appreciative audience of one. The request, delivered with such uncharacteristic diffidence, touched me deeply. How long had it been since anyone specifically asked to hear me play? My students viewed my demonstrations as instructional. My family politely endured their attention elsewhere. I would be happy to play for you, I said, meaning it. Though I should warn you, my repertoire has grown somewhat limited. Arthritis makes Liszt and Rachmaninoff increasingly challenging. All musicians edit their repertoire with time, Arthur replied matter-of-factly. The wise ones adapt rather than abandon. Clara switched to Baroque works in her later years. Fewer extended positions, more opportunity for expressiveness within technical constraints. Again, that surprising knowledge, delivered without condescension or pity, just practical understanding of a musician's physical realities. You continue to surprise me, Arthur Caldwell, I confessed, setting the table as he prepared a simple fruit compote. Good, he said, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. Predictability is the enemy of engagement. Clara used to say she stayed with me for 43 years because she never knew what I might say next. James was the opposite. I found myself sharing a pang of old memories. Completely reliable, entirely predictable. I always knew exactly how he would respond to any given situation. It was comforting. Different personalities require different companions, Arthur observed, his gaze suddenly insightful. The theatrical temperament benefits from a stabilizing influence. Perhaps the musical one thrives with dependable rhythms. The insight was unexpectedly perceptive. Before I could respond, the oven timer chimed. Arthur extracted a perfectly puffed pancake, its edges golden and crisp, creating a glorious hollow for the fruit compote. Impressive, I acknowledged, as he served our plates with the flourish of a seasoned maître d'idée. You've been holding out on me, Arthur. Yesterday's omelette was no fluke. Culinary skills developed from necessity, he explained, joining me at the table. After Clara died, I could either learn to cook properly or resign myself to an endless succession of mediocre restaurant meals and sympathy casseroles. We ate in companionable silence. The pancake was exquisitely light, slightly custardy, the compote a perfect tart counterpoint. Our children would be shocked, I observed, accepting a second helping, to see us sharing breakfast like this, so comfortable in each other's company. It rather undermines their perception of us as difficult and demanding, doesn't it? Perhaps that's the most valuable lesson in this situation, Arthur replied thoughtfully. That their parents are full human beings, not merely aging problems to be managed or character traits to be tolerated. After breakfast, we returned to our sewing project, completing the second set of curtains by mid-morning. Arthur insisted on hanging them immediately, the effort visibly taxing him, but the result was transformative. The heavy damask of 15 years, replaced by luminous blue linen, made the entire space feel both more elegant and more welcoming. It's as if the room can breathe again, I said, stepping back to admire our work. Precisely the effect I was aiming for, Arthur agreed, settling carefully into an armchair. Now, I believe you promised me a private recital. I moved to the piano, a flutter of performance anxiety I hadn't felt in years. What to play for this man who knew so much yet wasn't a musician himself? After a moment's consideration, I began with Schubert's Impromptu in G-flat major, romantic without being showy, technically manageable, yet rich with emotional depth. As the music filled the room, I found myself playing not as a teacher, nor a solitary practitioner, but as a genuine performer, communicating through sound. Arthur listened with complete attention, sometimes his eyes closed, sometimes watching my hands. When the Schubert ended, I flowed seamlessly into Debussy's Reflets dans l'eau, then Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Each piece emerged from some deeper musical intuition, a program I hadn't consciously planned. Nearly 40 minutes later, I finally paused, surprised by how much I had played without tiring. Arthur remained silent for a moment, allowing the final notes to dissipate. "Thank you," he said simply. "That was extraordinary." "You're very kind," I demurred automatically. "Not kind, accurate." His tone brooked no argument. "You play with remarkable sensitivity. Technical proficiency, yes, but more importantly, genuine interpretive intelligence. One understands why you've been a successful teacher all these years." The specific, knowledgeable praise affected me more deeply than any effusive compliment. "You know more about music than you let on," I observed. 43 years with Clara, he reminded me. Countless rehearsals, performances, post-concert analyses. Music was our common language, though I participated as listener rather than creator. The most important participant in any performance, I noted. Without the listener, music is merely vibrating air. A notification from my phone interrupted our conversation. Another message from Robert. "Getting worried again? Mom, you're not responding much. Is everything really okay?" Also, Bethany tried calling her stepfather's nursing home and they said he was on leave. What's going on? I showed Arthur the message, the escalating concern clear. "They're not enjoying their cruise much, it seems." "Good," Arthur said with a hint of satisfaction. Though I'm troubled by Bethany's characterization of my living situation. I'm in a private retirement community, not a nursing home, independent living with optional services. "Another example of them recasting our lives to fit their narrative," I observed, composing a reply. "Everything is absolutely wonderful. Arthur has made Dutch baby pancakes for breakfast, and I've been playing piano all morning. We finished the curtains and they've transformed the living room. Pictures attached. Don't worry about calling Arthur's residence. We've extended his stay through Tuesday. We're having such a lovely time. Might take a drive to the lake this afternoon if weather permits." I added a photo of our newly curtained living room, careful to show enough change to be noticeable without revealing the full extent of our transformation. "Tuesday?" Arthur questioned, reading over my shoulder. "That's a day beyond their scheduled return." "Sucks." "A small escalation," I explained, suggesting we're so comfortable together that we've extended our arrangement beyond their imposed timeline. His smile held genuine admiration. "Margaret Walsh, you have a devious streak I find utterly delightful." High praise from the mastermind of our psychological operation, I replied, an unexpected flush of pleasure at his approval. Speaking of operations, Arthur said, glancing out the window at the clear autumn day. Were you serious about that drive to the lake? It's been years since I've seen Lake Champlain, and the weather seems ideal. The suggestion caught me by surprise. I'd mentioned it to enhance our narrative of comfortable companionship, but looking at the golden sunlight streaming through our new curtains, the idea suddenly appealed tremendously. I'd love to, I decided impulsively. The foliage along the shore drive should be spectacular this time of year. Arthur's face lit with genuine pleasure. Excellent. Though I should warn you, I make a terrible passenger. Clara said I have an unfortunate tendency to provide unsolicited navigational advice. I'm sure I've heard worse from 40 years of backseat driving piano parents, I assured him, already charting our escape. Pack a sweater. The wind off the lake can be bracing. As I gathered my own things, a quiet realization settled. In just 3 days, we'd morphed from reluctant housemates into willing accomplices. Whatever our children had intended by throwing us together, they couldn't have foreseen this easy alliance, this unexpected compatibility between two supposedly difficult personalities. A smile touched my lips as I found my car keys. Perhaps the ultimate revenge wasn't making them worry, but showing them, unequivocally, how wrong they'd been about us. Lake Champlain unfurled before us like a sheet of liquid silver, its vast surface mirroring the crisp autumn sky with flawless precision. We'd chosen the scenic route, a ribbon of asphalt unspooling through forests ablaze with late-season fire. Arthur, to his credit, had been an exemplary passenger. His commentary wasn't the usual backseat driver's critique, but an informed appreciation of the landscape, identifying distant mountain peaks, marvelling at particularly spectacular maples, and weaving historical anecdotes into the tapestry of the passing towns. The British actually fired on that harbour during the War of 1812, he'd remarked as we'd glided past a small bayside village. A minor skirmish, largely forgotten by history, yet meticulously preserved in local memory. Now we sat on a lakeside bench in Burlington Bay Park, bundled against the brisk wind that occasionally ruffled the lake's surface into 1,000 tiny white caps. I'd thought ahead, packing a small thermos of hot tea and a handful of leftover maple cookies. My pre-retirement baking seemed to find an unexpected purpose. We shared them in comfortable silence as distant sailboats skimmed across the water like white birds. I'd forgotten how magnificent this view is, Arthur murmured, his gaze fixed on the Adirondacks, rising like ancient titans beyond the lake. Clara and I came here once during my visiting semester at mid-87, I believe. We rented a small sailboat, grossly overestimated our maritime abilities, and had to be rescued by an amused park ranger when the wind died unexpectedly. I pictured it. A younger Arthur, less constrained by his body, but likely just as opinionated, adrift with his musician wife. James was terrified of water, I offered in return. He could swim, but natural bodies of water filled him with inexplicable dread. We compromised by picnicking at lookout points like this one, close enough to appreciate the lake's beauty, far enough to avoid its dangers. A sensible arrangement, Arthur nodded. Successful marriages require such accommodations. Yes, I agreed, a faint ache resurfacing as I recalled the effortless way James and I had navigated our differences, building a life that honoured both his need for routine and my occasional impulsive artistic requirements. Though I sometimes wonder if I've accommodated too much since his death. Arthur turned slightly, his expression questioning, prompting me to clarify. With Robert, I mean. Allowing his concerns to shape my choices more than perhaps they should, accepting his definition of what's appropriate for someone my age. The gradual erosion of autonomy, Arthur articulated, his voice a low, knowing hum, nearly imperceptible until one suddenly finds oneself being managed rather than consulted. Exactly that, I confirmed, grateful for his precise naming of a feeling I'd struggled to define. And I've allowed it. which is perhaps the most frustrating part of all. Self-recrimination serves little purpose, Arthur observed mildly. Recognizing the pattern is what matters, adjusting course while there's still time to chart a new direction. His words carried no judgment, only practical wisdom. I found myself wondering what kind of professor he had been, likely demanding but fair, challenging his students to greater clarity of thought without diminishing their efforts. "What will you tell them?" I asked after a comfortable silence, the question hanging in the brisk air. "When they return and discover our little deception," Arthur considered, watching a pair of kayakers glide along the shoreline below us. "The truth, I think. That we objected to being manipulated, to decisions made on our behalf without consultation. That we chose to make a point through somewhat theatrical means. And about us?" The question emerged before I'd fully formed it in my own mind. "That we discovered unexpected compatibility," he replied carefully. "That adversity, even artificially imposed adversity, can forge connections between unlikely allies." "Friendship," I supplied, naming the quiet, blossoming thing that had developed between us over these strange, transformative days. "Indeed," he smiled, the expression warming his scholarly features. "An unexpected gift from a thoroughly ill-conceived matchmaking scheme." We sat in comfortable silence for several more minutes, watching the play of light on water, the distant mountains standing sentinel. Eventually, noting Arthur's slight shiver despite the heavy sweater, I suggested we continue to a small cafe I knew in Charlotte, excellent soup, and a heated lake view porch. As we walked carefully back to my car, Arthur leaning more heavily on his cane than before, I found myself automatically adjusting my pace to match his, offering my arm on a particularly uneven section of path. Not with the hovering concern of someone managing a fragile elder, but with the natural consideration of one friend for another. "You know," Arthur said as we settled back into the car, a quiet admission in the confined space, "I believe this is the first time since Clara's death that I've spent a day out without being hyper-aware of my limitations, without feeling like a burden or an inconvenience to whoever has accompanied me." The simple admission touched me deeply. "I can't imagine anyone finding your company burdensome," I said honestly. "Then you have a limited imagination indeed," he replied, though his tone held no bitterness, merely wry self-awareness. "I am, as Bethany has undoubtedly informed you, difficult and set in my ways. These qualities do not make me an ideal companion for excursions that require patience and accommodation. Perhaps you've simply been paired with impatient and inflexible companions," I suggested, navigating back toward the scenic route that would take us to Charlotte. Arthur's laugh was unexpected, a genuine sound of surprised delight. "Clara would have adored you," he declared. "She always accused me of selecting the wrong metrics for evaluating interpersonal dynamics." "A fancy way of saying you misjudge people?" I teased gently. "Precisely that." His admission held no defensiveness, only self-deprecating humour. A lifelong habit I've struggled to correct. The cafe in Charlotte was exactly as I'd remembered, a converted Victorian house with a glass-enclosed porch offering panoramic views of the lake. We were guided to a prime corner table, served excellent butternut squash soup and fresh bread, then left in peace to enjoy both the food and the spectacular vista unfolding beyond the glass. "We should document this excursion," Arthur suggested as we finished our meal, "for our ongoing narrative." I understood immediately, retrieving my phone to take a selfie against the backdrop of the deepening blue lake. Arthur leaned in slightly, his white hair a striking contrast to my silver grey. Both of us wore expressions of genuine enjoyment, free from the stiffness of obligatory photographs. "Perfect," he pronounced, reviewing the image. "Send it with a suitably ambiguous caption." I composed a new message to Robert. "Wonderful day exploring the lake with Arthur. He knows so much about local history. Now enjoying soup at Charlotte Bay Cafe. No need to check in so frequently. We're having a marvellous time together. Such an unexpected connection. We've decided Arthur will stay through Tuesday since we're enjoying each other's company so much. The repeated unexpected connection phrase should thoroughly unsettle them, Arthur noted with satisfaction, particularly combined with the extended stay reference. You're enjoying this entirely too much, I observed, though without censure. I haven't had this much fun since staging Ionesco's The Chairs with an actual flood in the theatre basement, he admitted. There's something uniquely satisfying about controlled chaos and its resultant revelations. As we drove home in the gathering twilight, a comfortable silence settled between us. Arthur dozed briefly, the day's activities having clearly taxed his endurance, while I navigated the darkening roads with the confidence of long familiarity. The experience felt surprisingly intimate, not in any romantic sense, but in the quiet trust of shared vulnerability. He didn't feel compelled to stay alert or engaged for my benefit. I didn't feel obligated to maintain conversation for his. Back home, we moved through the evening routine we'd somehow established in just a few days. Arthur made tea while I built a small fire in the living room fireplace, unused for months, but now somehow essential to our evening ritual. We settled into the newly arranged seating area, the flames casting warm, flickering light across the room, now transformed by our collaborative efforts. Shall we check their response? Arthur suggested, gesturing toward my phone, which I'd deliberately left untouched since sending our latest provocative message. The screen glowed with multiple notifications, 3 missed calls and a series of increasingly concerned texts from both Robert and Bethany. I selected the most recent. Mom, seriously, what's going on? Unexpected connection, extended stay. You barely know Arthur, and Bethany says he can be very difficult. We're worried about you. Please call as soon as you can. I showed Arthur the message, noting his raised eyebrow at the very difficult reference. They're genuinely concerned now, I observed, feeling another flicker of guilt. Perhaps we've taken this far enough. Perhaps, Arthur conceded. What did you have in mind? Arthur's smile, that familiar hint of mischief playing at the corners, deepened. He wanted something to suggest our connection had progressed beyond mere friendship, without explicitly stating anything. Let them draw their own conclusions, he'd said, which will undoubtedly be dramatic and entirely wrong. Oh, our little scheme had certainly made its point, but there was an undeniable satisfaction in this final twist. Very well, Professor Caldwell, I conceded. What do you propose? Arthur dictated, his theatrical timing impeccable. Robert, dear, no need for concern. Arthur and I have indeed discovered how compatible we are. Despite our brief acquaintance, some connections simply defy conventional timelines. We're discussing potential arrangements for after your return. This house does have plenty of room after all. We'll explain everything when you're back. Sleep well, I typed as he spoke, then showed him the message. Deliciously ambiguous, I approved, delighting in the suggestion of living arrangements without actually claiming anything specific. The strategic deployment of implications, Arthur nodded, a glint in his eye, a specialty of both theatre and academia. As I pressed send, setting our final act in motion, a sudden clarity washed over me. I would miss this, the conspiracy, the shared humour, the intellectual stimulation of Arthur's company when our children returned and our brief alliance reached its inevitable conclusion. The recognition must have shown on my face, for Arthur's expression softened, shedding his usual sardonic mask. For what it's worth, Margaret, he said quietly, his gaze steady, these have been the most engaging days I've experienced in years. For me as well, I admitted, a whisper of surprise in my voice. Quite an unexpected result from an unwelcome imposition. Outside, the first snow flurries of the season began to fall, delicate crystalline messengers swirling against the darkened windows. Inside, the fire crackled in friendly counterpoint to our conversation as we began another game of Scrabble. This one was less competitive, more an excuse to prolong the evening, to extend our companionship before the inevitable return to our separate lives. Monday dawned with a light dusting of snow, transforming my garden into a monochromatic etching, the world reimagined in white, black, and infinite shades of grey. I found Arthur already in the kitchen, his morning routine now established, preparing what had become our customary breakfast. "Our final full day of imposed companionship," he observed, handing me a cup of coffee, precisely as I preferred it. "How shall we mark the occasion?" I sipped the coffee, considering. "We've redecorated the living room, completed the curtains, played Scrabble, and toured the lake. What's left for our fabricated romantic narrative?" "Perhaps something appropriately domestic yet subtly suggestive of deeper connection," Arthur mused, his expression thoughtful as he expertly flipped a perfect omelette. "A shared creative project, perhaps." "I do have James's old camera equipment in the attic," I offered, the idea taking shape as I spoke. "He was quite the photography enthusiast. I've thought about organising his collection for years but never found the motivation." "Perfect," Arthur declared. "Sorting through personal history together suggests intimacy without explicitly claiming it, and it provides opportunity for genuine connection through shared discovery." After breakfast, we ventured into the attic, a space I hadn't properly visited in years, accessing it only occasionally to retrieve holiday decorations or store unused household items. The stairs posed a challenge for Arthur, but he managed with careful determination, refusing my offered assistance with a polite but firm, "I may be slow, but I am still capable. Thank you." The attic was surprisingly orderly, a testament to James's meticulous nature. His photography equipment occupied a clear section along the back wall, boxes of prints, albums, and several cameras arranged on shelves he'd built specifically for their storage. "He was serious about this," Arthur observed, examining a professional-grade Nikon with knowledgeable hands. "This is excellent equipment, even by today's standards." Photography was his counterbalance to chemistry, I explained, opening a box of carefully labelled prints. The precision of science during the week, the creativity of image-making on weekends. We settled on the attic floor, cushioned by old quilts I retrieved from a cedar chest, and began exploring James's photographic legacy. The images revealed a perspective of my late husband I'd somehow forgotten. His eye for composition, his ability to capture intimate moments without sentimentality, his particular fascination with the interplay of light and shadow. "These are remarkable," Arthur said, examining a series of black and white landscapes. "He had genuine talent." "Yes," I agreed, surprised by how deeply the recognition affected me. He always called it a hobby, but he approached it with the same dedication he brought to his academic work. As we sorted through decades of images, I found myself sharing stories about James, about our life together, about the trips and experiences documented in his photographs. Arthur listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite accommodation. In one box, we discovered a series of images James had taken of me playing piano, gardening, reading by windows, unaware of the camera's presence. Seeing myself through my husband's eyes was unexpectedly moving, the obvious love in his perspective, the care with which he'd captured moments I hadn't realised were being preserved. "He saw you very clearly," Arthur observed quietly, studying a particularly striking image of me at the piano, my expression absorbed in the music, light from the window creating a natural spotlight. "Not just your physical presence, but something essential about your character." "Yes," I whispered, my throat suddenly tight with emotion. He did. Arthur set the photograph aside with unexpected gentleness. "Perhaps we should take a break. This is becoming more affecting than our psychological warfare operation anticipated." His perception and consideration touched me. "Thank you," I said simply. We moved downstairs for lunch, a simple affair of soup and bread, and I found myself contemplating the strange intimacy that had developed between us in just 4 days. This man who had arrived as an unwelcome imposition had somehow become a trusted confidant, someone with whom I could share memories of James without the awkward sympathy or impatient tolerance, Such reminiscences often inspired in others. "You're thinking too loudly again," Arthur noted, his tone gently teasing. "Just reflecting on how quickly circumstances can change," I replied. "4 days ago I was dreading your presence. Now I find myself—" I hesitated, uncertain how to articulate the shift. "Tolerating me admirably," he suggested with a hint of his dry humour. "Enjoying your company," I corrected firmly, and rather dreading its conclusion. The admission hung between us, more vulnerable than I had intended. Arthur's expression softened, the usual sardonic mask slipping to reveal something gentler beneath. "The sentiment is entirely mutual," he said quietly, his voice low. "These days have been unexpectedly significant." Before I could respond, my phone rang. Not a text this time, but an actual call from Robert. Arthur and I exchanged glances, our private moment interrupted by the very situation that had brought us together. "Should I answer?" I asked, though I already knew we must eventually face the consequences of our little scheme. "By all means," Arthur nodded, though he added, "perhaps on speaker so we may coordinate our performance." I accepted the call, activating the speakerphone. "Hello, Robert." "Mom!" My son's voice carried equal measures of relief and concern. "Finally? We've been trying to reach you for days." "I've responded to your texts," I reminded him mildly. "Arthur and I have been quite busy." "That's exactly what we're worried about," Robert replied, his tone shifting to one I recognized all too well, the careful, overly patient voice he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. "These messages about unexpected connections and extended stays, it's not like you, Mom." "Perhaps you don't know what's like me as well as you think," I suggested, catching Arthur's approving nod from across the table. "Mom, be reasonable. You've known this man for 4 days, and suddenly you're talking about him staying longer, about potential arrangements. Bethany says he can be very challenging to deal with." Arthur's eyebrows rose at this diplomatic rendering of his supposedly difficult personality. "Arthur and I understand each other perfectly," I said, enjoying the deliberate ambiguity. "Sometimes the most unexpected people prove to be the most compatible." A new voice joined the conversation, Bethany apparently listening on another extension. "Margaret, we're just concerned. Arthur has been known to be persuasive, and he's had some health issues recently that require consideration." Arthur's expression darkened at this characterization. He gestured for permission to speak, which I granted with a nod. "Bethany," he said, his voice carrying the precise diction of his theatrical training, "while I appreciate your concern, I assure you both my powers of persuasion and my health status have been grossly misrepresented. Margaret and I are both perfectly competent adults, enjoying each other's company without any need for supervision or intervention." Silence greeted this pronouncement, followed by Robert's cautious, "Arthur, hello? We didn't realize you were listening." "Evidently," Arthur replied dryly. "Just as you didn't realize how transparent your little scheme would be to 2 reasonably intelligent individuals." Another silence, this one more pronounced. I could almost see Robert and Bethany exchanging panicked glances across the cruise ship cabin. "Scheme?" Bethany attempted innocence, her voice a thin, reedy sound even over the phone line. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Oh, I think you are," I interjected, the calm precision of my voice surprising even myself. "The convenient cruise, the last-minute arrangements, the obvious hope that throwing 2 difficult elderly relatives together might solve your perceived problems with both of us." "Mum, that's not," Robert began. "Isn't it?" I cut him off, a sharp breath. "Be honest, Robert. This wasn't just about a cruise opportunity. This was about seeing if Arthur and I might— What? Become companions? Solve your elder care concerns in one convenient package?" The extended silence hummed, a far more damning admission than any whispered confession. "We thought you might enjoy each other's company," Bethany finally offered, a brittle defensiveness in her tone. "You're both intelligent, cultured people with similar backgrounds, and both inconveniently independent in our living arrangements," Arthur added, his voice dry, a perfectly aimed dart. Robert's voice shifted, settling into the familiar, reasonable tone he reserved for difficult negotiations. Look, maybe we should discuss this when we get back tomorrow, in person, when everyone's had time to process. An excellent suggestion, I agreed, exchanging a swift, charged glance with Arthur. We have much to tell you about our time together. Just don't make any major decisions before we return. The concern in Robert's voice was palpable, even through the thin membrane of the phone connection. Okay, no big changes or arrangements. We're quite capable of making our own decisions, Robert, I replied, a new firmness in my voice that silenced him momentarily. But we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Safe travels. After ending the call, Arthur and I sat in a thoughtful quiet. The reality of our impending return to separate lives now felt immediate. A chill in the cabin air. Well, he said finally, his gaze distant, it appears our little performance has had precisely the effect we intended. They're thoroughly disconcerted by the possibility that their matchmaking succeeded beyond their expectations. Yes, I agreed, though the satisfaction I felt was far less than I'd anticipated. The conversation had clarified something I'd been reluctant to acknowledge. Tomorrow would bring not just our children's return, but the conclusion of this unexpected interlude. The snow, I noticed, had stopped. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Arthur considered the question with the solemnity it deserved. We continue as planned. They arrive. We reveal our awareness of their scheme. We establish clear boundaries regarding future decision-making. And then... He left the sentence unfinished, the then hanging between us, the return to our separate lives, the end of our brief alliance. And then, I echoed, surprised by my reluctance to articulate the end we both recognized was coming. Outside, the world was transformed, familiar shapes softened by a fresh coat of white. Inside, a similar transformation had occurred, less visible, more profound. 4 days of unexpected companionship had reshaped something fundamental in my daily existence, awakened aspects of myself I'd allowed to go dormant. The question was whether that change could, or should, extend beyond this artificial situation our children had created. Arthur met my gaze, his expression mirroring my own complex thoughts. Perhaps, he said carefully, we should discuss what comes after then, while we still have the privacy to do so. Perhaps we should, I agreed, recognizing that whatever happened next would be our choice. Not our children's clumsy scheme, not their well-intentioned manipulation, but our own authentic decision about the unexpected connection that had developed between two supposedly difficult people thrown together by circumstance. I woke on Tuesday morning with a disorienting awareness that something significant was ending. Our 4-day adventure in psychological warfare and unexpected friendship had reached its final act. Robert and Bethany would return this evening, expecting either confirmation of their matchmaking triumph or the dramatic fallout of two difficult personalities at odds. What they would actually discover was something far more nuanced, and perhaps more unsettling to their worldview. Arthur was already in the kitchen when I descended, but he'd departed from our established routine. Instead of cooking breakfast, he sat at the table, a cup of coffee untouched before him, a distant expression suggesting deep thought. "Good morning," I greeted him, pouring my own coffee. "You look contemplative, plotting our final act," he replied, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The dramatic confrontation when our children returned to find their scheme uncovered. "Ah yes, the denouement," I said, settling across from him, though I find myself less interested in their discomfort than I was 4 days ago. "As do I," he admitted, a sigh escaping him. "Revenge, even of our mild variety, has lost some of its appeal." We sat in companionable silence for a moment, both aware of the conversation we'd begun yesterday, still unfinished, the question of what came after the day's revelations, and the return to separate lives. "About our discussion yesterday," Arthur began, setting his coffee cup aside with a precise, almost ritualistic movement. I've been considering what comes next after our children's return. As have I acknowledged. And have you reached any conclusions? His tone was carefully neutral, giving no indication of his own path. I considered how to articulate the complex emotions that had developed over our brief acquaintance. I've enjoyed these days more than I anticipated, I began cautiously, tracing the rim of my cup. Your company has been stimulating, engaging in a way my life hasn't been for some time. High praise indeed, he noted, a hint of his dry humour inflecting his words, from someone who initially viewed my presence as an imposition. The highest, I confirmed seriously, and I find myself reluctant to return to the solitude that preceded your arrival. Arthur's expression shifted subtly surprise, perhaps, or a subtle loosening of tension. I've been thinking similarly, he admitted. These past days have reminded me of aspects of social existence I'd forgotten I enjoyed. Conversation with someone of compatible intellect, shared meals, even the small domestic negotiations of shared space. We work well together, I observed, a quiet certainty in my voice. Despite our supposedly difficult natures, he suggested, a wry smile playing on his lips. Or perhaps because of them. Two strong personalities who respect each other's boundaries, precisely because we value our own so highly. The insight was characteristically perceptive. What might have been friction between us had instead created a balanced tension, a mutual recognition of independence that paradoxically allowed for closer connection. So where does that leave us? I asked directly, never one for excessive circumlocution. When Robert and Bethany return, expecting either conflict or romance, what do we tell them? Arthur leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes intent, unblinking. The truth, I think, that we discovered an unexpected friendship, that we enjoyed each other's company, and may wish to continue that association on our terms rather than theirs. Friendship, I echoed, finding the word both accurate and somehow insufficient for what had developed between us. Yes, that seems right, he added carefully, with the potential for more, if that's something you might consider, eventually, without pressure or expectation. The qualification was so typically Arthur precise, leaving room for dignified retreat if necessary, yet honest in its expression of possibility. I found myself smiling at his characteristic approach. I might consider it, I acknowledged, warmth blooming in my chest, eventually, without pressure or expectation. His answering smile held genuine warmth, a rare, open expression. Then I believe we understand each other. I believe we do, I agreed, a sense of quiet rightness settling between us. The remainder of the day passed in preparations for our children's return. We completed the finishing touches on our redecorating project. Arthur insisted on helping me prepare a welcome home meal, despite my protests that he was a guest. No longer merely a guest, he corrected, expertly chopping vegetables for a salad. An ally at minimum, perhaps a co-conspirator, possibly even a friend. All of the above, I conceded, allowing him to take over the salad preparation while I focused on the main course. As afternoon faded toward evening, I found myself growing unexpectedly nervous. Our children's imminent return meant facing not just their reaction to our revelation, but also the reality of Arthur's departure. Despite our conversation about future possibilities, practical questions remained unanswered. How often we might see each other, whether our connection could sustain itself outside the intensity of these 4 isolated days. "They're here," Arthur announced from his post near the front window where he'd stationed himself with deliberate theatricality. 2 cars. They must have driven separately from the airport. I joined him at the window, watching Robert's sedan pull into my driveway, followed by Bethany's SUV. They emerged looking travel-worn but alert, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity as they approached my front door. "Ready?" Arthur asked quietly. "As I'll ever be," I replied, straightening my shoulders. The doorbell chimed and I moved to answer it. Arthur positioned himself strategically in the living room, where the full impact of our redecorating efforts would be immediately visible. "Mom!" Robert exclaimed as I opened the door, embracing me with more emotion than our usual greetings carried. "You're okay?" "Of course I'm okay," I replied, accepting his hug while noting Bethany hovering anxiously behind him. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Your messages," Bethany explained, following Robert into the foyer, her eyes wide. They were so cryptic. And then, that last one about potential arrangements. Her voice a brittle thread snapped as her gaze swept the living room. New curtains shimmered. Furniture stood rearranged in unfamiliar constellations. And there, in what was once James's chair, sat Arthur, observing them with an unnerving calm. "Arthur?" she managed, a tremor in her tone. "You're still here, as anticipated," he replied, his voice a dry rustle of autumn leaves. "Though perhaps not in the condition you expected," Robert's gaze darted between them, suspicion tightening his jaw. "What does that mean? And what happened to the living room?" "We redecorated," she explained, a rehearsed ease in her voice. "The room needed updating. Arthur has an excellent eye." "You redecorated, together," Robert repeated slowly, each word a stone weighing down the silence. "And the fire department? The insurance adjusters?" Arthur and she exchanged a glance, a flicker of silent conspiracy. It did not go unnoticed. "Perhaps we should all sit down," she suggested, sweeping a hand towards the plush new seating. "There's quite a bit to discuss." Once settled, Robert and Bethany perched stiffly on the sofa. Arthur and she sunk into matching armchairs. She began their carefully crafted narrative. First, there was no fire, no emergency, no crisis of any kind. Her voice was a placid stream masking a deeper current. Those references were deliberately misleading. "But why would you?" Robert started, his brows furrowed. "Because," Arthur interjected smoothly, leaning forward, "we rather quickly discerned the actual purpose behind your convenient cruise and my equally convenient placement here." Bethany's cheeks flushed a delicate rose. "I don't know what you're implying." "Oh, I think you do," she countered gently, a knowing glint in her eye. "The suddenly available cruise, the last-minute arrangement, the hope that throwing two supposedly difficult elderly relatives together might solve your perceived problem of our independent living situations." Robert had the grace to look down, a flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. "Mom, it wasn't like that. We just thought," Arthur supplied a wry twist to his lips, "that we might get along, form a connection that would make your lives more convenient, perhaps even consider sharing living arrangements, solving two elder care concerns with one efficient solution." The uncomfortable silence that followed was all the confirmation they needed. "Here's what actually happened," she continued, her gaze firm. "We immediately recognized your scheme for what it was. We were initially quite annoyed at being manipulated, at having decisions made for us without consultation. So, we decided," Arthur added, a mischievous glint in his eye, "to give you a taste of your own medicine, to create sufficient anxiety and uncertainty that you might reconsider such high-handed tactics in the future." Understanding dawned on Robert's face, a slow sunrise. The cryptic messages, the fires and insurance, the unexpected connection. It was all a performance. "Precisely," Arthur confirmed, "designed to unsettle you just as you had unsettled us with your presumptuous arrangements." That's... Bethany seemed to lose her voice, her hands fluttering in the air. "Childish, perhaps," she offered, a faint smile playing on her lips. "But effective, I think, in demonstrating how it feels to have others making decisions about your life without your input or consent." Robert leaned forward, his shame replaced by genuine contrition. "You're right. We should have asked, not assumed. I'm sorry, Mom. And Arthur, I apologize for putting you in this position." "Apology accepted," she said, Arthur nodding in quiet agreement beside her. "But there's something else you should know." "What's that?" Bethany asked, a weary sigh escaping her lips. She glanced at Arthur, who offered a subtle nod of encouragement. While your scheme was inappropriate in its execution, it wasn't entirely misguided in its basic premise. Arthur and I have, in fact, discovered that we enjoy each other's company. You have? Robert's surprise was evident in his voice, a raw, unvarnished question. Indeed, Arthur confirmed, a hint of warmth softening his gaze. Your mother is an exceptional pianist, a formidable Scrabble opponent, and possesses a devious streak that complements my own theatrical tendencies quite admirably. And Arthur, she added, catching his eye, has proven to be thoughtful, intellectually engaging, and surprisingly domestic in his abilities. We've formed a friendship we both value and intend to continue. Friendship, Robert repeated slowly, tasting the word, searching for hidden meanings. Yes, friendship, Arthur confirmed, his voice holding steady, unwavering, with the potential for further development should we both choose to explore that possibility on our terms, in our own time, without external pressure or expectation. The carefully worded statement left their children momentarily speechless, exactly the effect they had anticipated. So, you're not... Bethany gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the romantic scenario they'd either feared or hoped for. We're two adults who've discovered compatible interests and personalities, she clarified, her gaze steady, who may choose to spend more time together in the future. Nothing more definitive than that at present. I see, Robert said, though his expression still suggested a mind grappling with complex data. And the living arrangements you mentioned in your message? Arthur admitted, a faint smile playing on his lips. A deliberate provocation. Though we have discussed the possibility of future visits, she quickly added, seeing the lines of concern etched on Robert's face. Weekend stays, perhaps even longer sojourns eventually. But not immediate cohabitation or major life changes. We're proceeding at our own pace, making our own decisions about what feels right for us, Arthur concluded pointedly, which is precisely how it should be. Our lives, our choices. With your support welcomed, but your management neither required nor desired. The message was clear, delivered without unnecessary harshness, but with an unwavering resolve. She watched as understanding settled across their children's faces, the realization that their parents, while aging, remained competent individuals entitled to their own self-determination. Well, Robert said finally, I guess we deserve that lesson. You did, she agreed, without a trace of rancor. But dinner is ready, and I suggest we move past recriminations to enjoy our belated Thanksgiving meal together. There is, after all, much to be thankful for. As they moved towards the dining room, she caught Arthur's eye across the table, a silent communication of shared victory and genuine affection. Whatever came next would unfold according to their own timeline, their own carefully considered choices. But the connection they'd formed in these 4 unexpected days had already transformed something essential in both their lives. Their children had intended to solve a problem by throwing 2 difficult people together. Instead, they'd inadvertently created something neither they nor their parents could have anticipated, a genuine meeting of compatible minds, an alliance born of shared indignation that had blossomed into something with far greater potential. As she served the meal, prepared with Arthur's able assistance, she found herself genuinely thankful for their misguided scheme. After all, sometimes it seemed, the wrong reasons could lead to unexpectedly right results. 2 unexpected connections, Arthur proposed, raising his glass, a toast laden with layers of private meaning that passed between them. And to making our own choices, she added, completing the sentiment. Their glasses clinked in harmony, a delicate bell sounding not an ending, but a beginning one they would define for themselves, in their own time, on their own terms.